It's time for another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas, the podcast covering the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life in general here in the Ozarks. Whether you are considering a move to this area or trying to learn more about the place you call home, we've got something special for you. Here's our host, Randy Wilburn.
Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn. I'm excited to be here today. I've got another great guest for you. And you guys know I'm always finding guests in a variety of ways. This individual, I actually read about him, and I can't remember where I saw an article, but then I also saw a post on LinkedIn that referenced his new app called Sober Sidekick and some of the things that this individual was doing in such a short period of time. And the thing that really connected me with him was the fact that he's only been here for a couple of months here in Northwest Arkansas at the time that we're recording this. And so I wanted to get him on the podcast. I wanted to hear his story because I think it's very special. And I think there's some of our listeners that could really benefit from hearing Chris's story. But Chris Thompson is the founder of Sober Sidekick, and we're excited to have you on the podcast. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here. Yeah. Ready to get into it.
Okay, cool. Well, listen, man, I'd love for you just to kind of share and as we always start this, we always want to get to know the individual that we're talking to. So if you could share your superhero origin story, you can go back as far as you want. If you want to go back to diapers, you can, but if you want to kind of start where your story started based on the story that you share on your website, that's fine too, but I'll let you have at it.
Yeah. Well, first off, I'm someone who believes everyone in recovery is on a superhero origin story or comeback story.
Yeah.
And I also believe, anyone can be in recovery from anything. It's not just drugs or alcohol. But yeah, back to me, I'm someone who was a college athlete. I started my first business at a young age. And, especially 19, 20, 21, I felt kind of invincible, I felt like I was first starting to believe I could do anything I set my mind to. And alcohol became like an added layer to the feeling that I had that I could accomplish anything. And, it boosted me for a while. It brought me out of my shell. It allowed me to be outgoing. I'm naturally an introverted person. It allowed me to deal with my fears, my insecurities, and gave me that pseudo confidence that I'd always wished I had. But around 21, 22, almost overnight, there was a crazy situation that I didn't know how to deal with. And almost overnight, alcohol became my only solution for all my problems. And go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because I read a little bit about you in advance. And one of the things that you mentioned, and I thought about this, was that it wasn't like you were that kid growing up sneaking alcohol and all that stuff. It was like one day you took a drink and it was almost like this was a long lost friend that you never knew you had. Yeah. And then that's just kind of where it evolved. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times when people think about addictions or people think about some of the vices that we struggle with, and we all struggle with different vices. Yeah. Let's be clear about that that it just sneaks up on you and happens all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. But I just think the way that you shared that was really interesting.
Yeah. And I've heard a lot of people in recovery describe it as their first drink was the first time they felt comfortable in their own skin.
Wow.
Is one way I've heard it described.
Yeah. I mean, and that says a lot, right? Because it's like, wow, that means, if you didn't get your first drink until you're like in your mid-20s, then that means that you've never felt comfortable in your own skin until that alcohol, you started consuming it, and then it gave you almost like a new identity, if you will.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why in my recovery, I'm quick to say alcohol was never my problem. It was my only solution.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm curious, what kind of athlete were you in college?
Basketball. It was D3. So nothing
it's
to brag
all good.
About.
It's all good. Yeah. No, I mean, listen, I went to school on a swimming scholarship, and I swam at Howard University. And that was for me, that was a big deal. I fell out of it after a couple of years just because I discovered girls and just living the life in Washington, D.C. I also had a job on Capitol Hill. So I don't know, there were a bunch of other influences that caused me to move away from being an athlete. But just the simple fact that I was able to go to college as an athlete, I understand the rigors of that, and it's not easy. So you have to put your all into it. So talk to me, because again, you share in your story that not long after you decided to become sober, even before that, can you give us kind of an idea of where alcohol took you before you overcame it?
Yeah. So I kept thinking for the next 3 years that this is my rock bottom. And it kept getting lower and lower and lower. I was, isolated. I couldn't finish anything. I had a ton of great ambition, but I couldn't finish anything. And, I watched myself slowly become the worst version of myself. I wasn't available to my family. I wasn't my relationships. I was pretty much everyone in my life, I was selling them short. And where it got me was a place I never thought I would be, considering where I was 3-4 years before. But Thanksgiving Day, 2018, November 22nd, which is actually today, I woke up on the sidewalk for about the 4th day in a row. The hospital pants and the poncho I was wearing were literally all I had left. I had lost my phone, my wallet, trying to buy Coke, just like a ridiculous bottom. And somewhere in LA, I was very new to LA.
Yeah.
So in a city that I didn't understand, didn't know, it had rained the night before, and it never rains in LA. And the whole night it was raining. I was just trying to move where like the rain wasn't constantly dripping on my forehead. Like literally a bottom that I never imagined for myself.
Yeah. Far away from home.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can only imagine what that's like when you hear those stories. And I think we all love a good comeback, right? And so when you were at that, what we'd call the nadir, right? The lowest point. Where were you mentally as far as that was concerned?
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons why it's so difficult for people to get over a substance abuse issue is because their body has become dependent on it. So for me that morning, I was waking up. When I woke up, my body was in the worst shape ever. You can die from, alcohol withdrawals.
Sure.
And, I've had these symptoms before, but I was like somewhat disconnected from reality. Like I knew what was real and I knew what wasn't, but what wasn't real felt way more real, like hallucinations, delirium tremens, like, completely sober, but can't walk straight, like can't put together a thought. And, it's Thanksgiving Day and I'm sitting outside the supermarket and I'm watching people go in and out buying groceries, pumpkin pies, all these different things. And, I had tried to ask a few people if I could borrow their phone and they're like, I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
And
on Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And, I realized I had gotten to that point, I had gotten to that point where I'm that guy on the side of the road that no one wants to talk to.
Yeah.
And, there's a thought that I had heard in AA meetings before that, which, people had described their rock bottom as my best thinking got me here. And, that was one of my first honest thoughts of that day is my best thinking got me here, which was the humility that I didn't have up to that point, which is I don't have the answers.
Yeah.
And, I don't know how I got here. I don't know whose fault it is, if it's my fault, if it's genetics, if it's trauma, but it doesn't matter at this point because only I can take responsibility for my life. And there's plenty of people who have overcome way worse situations.
Yeah.
And, that's where the question I started to ask in my head is, what if today is my day one? And one day or day one, what if today is day one?
Yeah. So then based on what you just said to me, had you tried to go through AA before you hit this lowest point? Had you tried to fix the problem?
Yeah. So I had tried, I've been trying probably for the last 9 months and I couldn't put together 30 days. The reason I was in California is I called a hotline and went to treatment for the first time. And I kind of went to treatment with the perspective that maybe they can fix me.
Sure.
And I mean, the biggest lesson for me in recovery is it's me versus me.
Yep.
You know,
you are your greatest competition.
Yeah.
There is nobody else.
Yeah. And that's a blessing or a curse.
Yeah.
And, you know, for the last 4 years, it's been a blessing because if everything is someone else's fault, there's nothing I can do to make my life better.
Right.
But any area that I can see my role in the situation is an area that I can get better in, an area that life can expand for me. And yeah, it's that victim mode that is so easy to fall into. And I thought I had the best victim story ever. So
you were like going to get an Academy Award for your victim story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, okay, so you're in LA, you are soaked. It's Thanksgiving, 2018.
Yeah.
And at that moment, that was kind of for you, the moment where you said, all right, something has to change.
Yeah.
What changed?
Yeah. So I guess I imagine, like, you know, it's hard putting together like the order of events or the order of thoughts, but I was picturing myself like 20 years from now.
Yeah.
And it's like, imagine if you look back 20 years from now and told a story about today was the day that you made that change. And then taking a step back and then focusing on today, it's like, you know, just more focused on today in that moment than ever before.
Right.
Because today is the only day that matters. I'm either going to take action today or I won't, you know, and I just committed that, you know, recovery is going to be my number one goal. That's going to be my number one priority. Because all the times up until then, it was my goal, but it was kind of an ancillary goal, like to get, like, I need to figure out how to, you know, stop drinking so I can go back to work.
Yeah.
Or I need to figure out how to stop drinking so I can, like, you know, hold a relationship or hold a friendship,
right.
You know, and it was always for these external things that weren't me.
Yeah.
You know, I need to get sober so I can stop disappointing my family, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And also it's that guilt and that shame and that stigma, which all of that, like the worst part of guilt and shame is the self-imposed part, because everyone has opinions, no matter whether you're doing well or you're doing terrible, like people are going to have opinions.
Yeah.
So, you know, since then, you know, I feel nothing but gratitude for where I am and where I came from. But when your internal guilt and your internal shame is so strong, then anything anyone says externally only amplifies that. So, you know, the other big leap was just setting aside that guilt and shame and, you know, doing whatever I needed to do to get help, you know, going wherever I needed to go to get help and just saying, I need help. And it took me like 10 hours to get to where I needed to get because the first few places didn't work out. But I finally walked into a sober living that I had gotten kicked out of like a month before and just walked in, and my friend Bill and Aaron were there. I just walked in and said, I need help. And that's when, you know, all the help came my way. So.
And then you also said somewhere that you had reached out to your mom, I guess, about helping you out. And you were like, listen, this is it. I've got to do it now or it's not going to happen. And, and she was able to help you, I guess.
Yeah. So that was the step before that. So I'd gone to a hospital and found my way there. And, you know, I was trying to say whatever I needed to say to get help. And they just said, this isn't a homeless shelter, but you can use the phone. So I called my mom and, you know, of course it's Thanksgiving. So she's stepping away from family. And I'm just feeling it, you know, from the perspective that all the families on the East Coast, like I'm putting them through this, like they haven't heard from me in a week and they're my phone is gone there and, you know, putting them through all this. And she offered to order me an Uber from the hospital to the sober living. And I just said, like, this is the last time. And I truly felt like I meant it at the time. And now 4 years later, I believe.
Yeah. You said that it was you were only like 60 days sober when when most people would still be hyper focusing on themselves, you were thinking, man, there should be something out there for other people that are going through what I'm going through that can kind of help them along the way. Is that in its simplest form how Sober Sidekick was born?
Yeah, well, it was actually 30 days later where I started.
Oh, I don't want to shortchange you now. 30 days. Okay.
60 days is when it was released.
Okay. I got you. I love that. But I mean, the simple fact is that you're 30 days being clean and sober, and already you're thinking about ways that not only it would benefit you, but it would ultimately help other people.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't call that selfless. In fact, I could make the case that it was selfish from the perspective that in recovery, I've learned that it's all about getting outside of yourself. Yeah. Like that's how you remain on track. That's how you stay grounded. That's how you stay in peace. And, I'm not a religious person, but, the third step prayer, God, who I just identify as a higher power that I will never understand. The third step prayer goes like, God, I offer myself to thee to build with me, to do with me as you will. Relieve me of the bondage to self, so I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties so that victory over them can bear witness to your love, your power, and your way of life. And the biggest line for me, the line that I hold on to in that prayer is relieve me of the bondage to self. And I believe recovery isn't about overcoming alcohol or drugs. It's overcoming ego. Alcohol and drugs is just the fuel that makes you so attached to your ego and so much in self-preservation mode.
Sure.
Fear-driven, and fear only comes from ego. It's about protecting a conception of yourself that isn't even real. So for me, like this felt like the best thing I could be doing for myself. And for one, like I've always been an entrepreneur and I like to code, it gets my creative juices going. So yeah. All that being said, I think it was the best thing I could have done for myself at the time.
And so Sober Sidekick has been in existence for almost 4 years, or 4 years right now?
Almost 4 years.
Almost 4 years. Okay. Yeah. And then can you give us kind of a walkthrough of what this app does? Yeah. And why people should even care about it?
Yeah. So from a broader perspective, one of the things we believe, our team believes, is that isolation is the single biggest social determinant of health in all behavioral health, but you can make the case throughout healthcare. And quality of life is dependent, in my opinion, largely on where on the spectrum of isolation and connectedness you feel.
Yeah.
And when you're in recovery, you need connection like right now sometimes, and it might be 2 a.m. And, so I was sitting in an AA meeting and I was watching the support flow back and forth and no one go without support. And, I was thinking like, how could we create an algorithm where no one ever goes without support? And that's the most important aspect of it. And, the other aspect of paying it forward and giving to receive, like what if paying it forward was built into the experience of the platform? So, 30 days later, released a very, very basic MVP, but the goal was just to test that exchange of support. And in theory, no one should ever go without support, meaning there is no scenario where someone would write a post and not get support from one of their peers.
A response.
Yeah. Written response from one of their peers.
And just for people listening, MVP is a minimum viable product. It's in the digital space and in other spaces. Even if you're starting a business, you might want to create a minimum viable product to see if that business has legs. And in this case, Chris created an MVP with the app to see if it would have some stickiness and people would want to start using it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to give people that. But go ahead, finish your thought.
Yeah. And after like 10 rejections from Apple, it was finally approved 30 days after that.
I'm glad you didn't give up.
Yeah.
Wow. 10 rejections. Okay. I've heard others. I have a friend that his app got rejected like 22 times before they actually said, yeah, we'll go ahead and do this. Yeah. So he had to keep fixing it and, Apple's very picky about how they want things to look and be on their app store.
Oh yeah. But the coolest part for me is like, as soon as it's live, it's like texting my friends in recovery, like Sober Sidekick, check it out. It's live in the app store. But then looking at the analytics and seeing people that I didn't know and reaching out to them and being like, how did you find us? And like on day one, them saying, I found you through a search. So seeing how big the problem was from the perspective that people are finding this on like the 5th page of some search.
Yeah.
Because they're looking for a solution, and isolation is their biggest problem.
Right.
And seeing that, like, and then seeing them all support each other from day one, that got my juices going. And, that made me realize like this could be the start of something huge if I stick with it.
Yeah. I mean, when you think of it, like, my dad, I haven't really told this story that much, but my father really struggled with alcohol, some drugs, not a lot, but definitely alcohol. And, I think my joke is like, he would have been, had he lived to this point in time when marijuana is legal, I think he would have been in his happy place. But the bottom line was he definitely struggled with alcohol, but he finally got free. And I still have his AA coin. And I remember, those meetings were everything for him. It really helped him. That camaraderie, the connectedness, as you said, was so important for him. And he never, up until his deathbed, he never had another drink. And I was always proud, that he was able to fight that demon, if you will, and overcome it and not let it control him. But he was fully aware that, he was susceptible to the whims like we all are, right? And 1 minute you can be at a high note, and the next minute you could be in the gutter somewhere. And so I always, for me, I recognize the power of those groups, and especially Alcoholics Anonymous, and how it can do it. But it could be anything. It can be, if you have a porn addiction, if you've got a substance abuse addiction, it doesn't really matter. Those groups can help you, right?
Yeah. Self-harm, eating disorders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even just chronic depression.
Yeah. No, without a doubt. So I think it's important. So you have obviously in some ways captured lightning in a bottle, because when you think of all of the AA organizations or meetings all over the world, there is a need for something like the Sober Sidekick.
And then the pandemic happened.
Right.
And
which caused people to be alone
and
isolated.
It didn't make the problem worse. In my opinion, it just exposed the problem.
Yeah.
That was always there.
Yeah. So what version are you now of this app?
Yeah. We're hundreds of iterations.
Okay. And, where is the app now versus where it was when you started in day 30?
Yeah. It's been rebuilt from scratch 3 or 4 times.
Okay.
And, it's just been optimized. Like, one of the big things early on in the first year is my phone number was available to our users.
Oh, okay.
Which was also good for my own recovery, because all day, every day, I'm getting calls from people who are on day one, or they're a few days ahead of me, but they're thinking about quitting that day.
Yeah.
Or like, people would tell me things that they never told their wife or their kids. Like, a guy told me, 30 days ago, I had a gun to my head and I pulled the trigger and it misfired.
Wow.
And I feel like I'm on a second chance at life.
Yeah.
People would tell me that the SWAT team kicked in my door last night. And even people in my own world, like that I knew from real life, but didn't know that they were in recovery or struggling, were reaching out to me.
Really?
And so I tried to put myself on the front lines as much as possible, because when you're building an app, what you're really building is a psychological experience.
Sure.
And how, like, there's a saying, people will forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah.
An app is the same way. So it's, the core features are important, but how you present them and the empathy behind how you present the design, empathy driven design is so important.
Sure.
And, in many ways, our first 100, our first 1,000 members were like co-founders.
Yeah.
And they were on it every day and they dealt with the bugs and they welcomed every new member. And that was the coolest part is like every time, a few new members trickled in a day, like all these people who had been around for 30 days, 60 days, just crowded that person with support. And our members were really our best feature, because they are the reason why people keep coming back.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love hearing that. And so at the present time, as we're recording this, you have, would you call them 150,000 daily active users, or would you just say you have 150,000
total?
Okay. Yeah. All right. That's cool. So, and obviously you're able to kind of see through the metrics how people are using the app, what they're doing. And certainly you're probably ideating different ways to make the app even better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
one of the coolest new features, which was actually somewhat simple to implement. A lot of times you think that, the hardest features are the most valuable features. But a few months ago, we released a feature that we call Impact Score.
Okay.
Where our members can actually see the impact that they've had on the sobriety time of others in real time. And then they can also see the butterfly effect. So it's like you supported 12 people in the last week and they've been sober for a combined 522 days.
Wow.
And then they went out and supported 150 people who have been sober for 2,000 days. And one of the things that's so important for people in early recovery is to realize that their suffering and their shame can be transformed into purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as soon as you realize that you are in a position to support people in a way no one else can because of your own personal experience, that's when you realize you're on a comeback story.
Right.
And the coolest thing for me is to see people, today who may have joined 30 days ago. Like, there was this woman who called me a few months ago and she's like, she had only been on the app for like 30 days. And she's like, wanted to let you know, I set up a support group for single moms in recovery through the app. And, we have a top features or top user section of the app. And any given time, there's someone who may have given written support 50 times in one day or 150 times.
Wow.
There's someone on the platform who has given support over 10,000 times.
Really?
Which is like 5 to 10 times more than I have. And I've been the creator and on the app from the beginning.
And the key thing about this, Chris, which I don't think should be lost on the audience, is that none of that would have been possible in the real world as opposed to being virtually or online, where you have an app and you're able to kind of multiply that impact that you have with people and the connectedness because of what the internet represents, and more importantly, because of what your app represents.
Yeah. And, the internet makes a lot of things possible. But I feel, unfortunately, we've used the internet to amplify our worst qualities.
Sure.
And, when it comes to big tech or mainstream tech, it's not about good engagement. It's just about engagement.
Yeah.
And, we built our platform with a we thesis, with empathy and without ego.
Okay.
Because when you optimize against ego and the user experience, people begin to realize that we're all the same.
Right.
And we all have fears and we all have insecurities, and that we're stronger together. One of our teammates, Lindy Backus, he was actually my economic development professor in college.
Okay.
But he's a part of our team now. And, he likes to quote a proverb, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. Yeah, that's a good one. So I love that. Well, I know people are probably wondering, how in the heck did you end up in Northwest Arkansas?
Yeah. So I just read a book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And, I was doing Sober Sidekick. I'd been doing Sober Sidekick for like a year and a half, but I was, working other jobs that weren't even tech, that were barely paying my bills. And this job interview came up for this job that I thought was way out of my league.
Yeah.
And I almost didn't go to the job interview. And, I thought, feel the fear and do it anyway. So I went to the job interview, and ended up getting the job, and Emma Willis was one of my interviewers, and we worked together for the next 6 months. And Emma Willis is Arkansas native, and she and her teammates were based in Arkansas. So that was my first exposure.
Okay. With Venture Noir?
No, not Venture Noir. It was a fintech company called Suchi.
Oh, Suchi. Okay, right. Yeah. Okay, got you. Yeah. So I know Emma very well, and Emma is an outstanding individual and a leader in this Northwest Arkansas community that's trying to diversify the opportunities that exist here in Northwest Arkansas and beyond.
Yeah, she's a pillar.
She is. That's a good word. That's what we're going to use. Emma Willis, the pillar. That's for sure. So go ahead. You can finish your thought.
Yeah. So worked together, built a really good relationship, and then we ended up quitting on the same day. And I told her, like, straight up, I'm going all in on Sober Sidekick now. And she went on to Venture Noir.
Right.
But immediately when she was at Venture Noir, she was like, you need to bring Sober Sidekick to Northwest Arkansas. And it's just like, I don't quite get it.
Yeah.
And, when you're in this startup world, there's so many well-intentioned people who are overselling things and don't know it.
Yep.
And, so initially, like, I didn't take it that seriously until she had just made connection after connection over Zoom. And then finally, I made a trip out here to meet some of those people in person. Ramsey Ball was the main one he's been sober for 15 years. And he was as soon as he heard about what we are doing, he became our biggest fan.
Okay.
And he wrote a couple checks also.
Okay.
As our first angel investor. So made a trip out here and saw the intentionality and kind of got this vibe that this location in itself is a startup.
Yeah.
And, one of the reasons why I will always be a part of my own startup or working for someone else's startup is when you are a part of a startup, you get to define things that weren't defined. And
yeah, that's a good point.
So we realized, like, this location is on a path to grow and grow very fast. And, there's intentionality about diversity. There's intentionality about community. There's intentionality about healthcare and closing gaps. And, people are approachable. And, coming from LA after COVID, all my meetings were over Zoom. No one wanted to drive anywhere or meet in person anywhere anyway. So it's like, I'm really missing in LA. I don't really party. I work all the time anyway.
Sure.
So what am I missing in LA by being here?
Right.
Outside of my walks on the beach, which I do miss that.
Yes.
But yeah. So took a leap of faith, and I definitely would not have been able to take that leap of faith if my girlfriend wasn't on board from the beginning also. So yeah, here we are. And it no longer feels like a leap of faith. It feels like sound logic.
I love that. Yeah. So what do you think of Northwest Arkansas? Just give me encapsulate it for people listening. Because, one of the things that we do with this podcast is we're always trying to encourage people to come here. Right. Mm-hmm. And I always say I'm trying to encourage a diverse set of folks to consider making Northwest Arkansas home. Yeah. This area is growing by leaps and bounds. I think it's like 30 net new people a day arrive here. So that's pretty cool. What would you say to somebody listening to this that has either heard about Northwest Arkansas, has a friend that lives here and is kind of on the edge about possibly moving here? What would your advice be coming from LA, which is important, and, coming here and finding the whole ecosystem, right? So just your life, but then also your work and everything else and how that plays into it. What would you say to somebody about Northwest Arkansas?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is don't knock it till you try it is the first thing I would say. And then from there, I would say, I've never been in a place where things move this quickly.
Yeah.
And you aren't crowded by noise, and, the right person is there and approachable.
Right.
And, a business, a startup, or whatever it is that drives you, it all comes down to, so much of it comes down to, the people who believe in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And one of the things I saw after attending the Heartland Summit and getting to know certain people very well is there are strong values that are held here when it comes to community, when it comes to changing the status quo. Because, if you look at Arkansas, how it's ranked as a state in certain areas,
we have our challenges.
Yeah, but the people who recognize that are extremely intentional.
Yes, that's a good point.
And even with like certain groups,
yeah,
like the people who want to make progress are, in my opinion, more intentional here than anywhere else.
Yeah.
And, the unity and the community that has been created around it, I feel like no one's competing against each other. And it's a focus on collaboration.
That's my sentiment. Exactly. That's what I've been saying, is that I don't know what it is. I mean, the playing field is fairly level here, and you don't feel like you've got somebody like waiting to just stab you in the back so they can take over what you're trying to do. Everybody is excited about what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
Like with my podcast, people are always like, oh man, I think it's great because you are highlighting all the things that make this such a special place. And you're bringing in all these diverse voices to share their story, like you.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And this is a place where it's not a competition as far as that's concerned. Yes, we have competition, but it's in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing I would add to what you said in terms of this being a diverse ecosystem for those that want to do startups or be involved with startups, it's also a good place to come if you just want to have a job.
Yeah.
Right. You got the Fortune 1 in Walmart. You've got the Fortune 50 or 500 in JB Hunt, and then Tyson. And I mean, there are all kinds of opportunities for people here in Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah. And even just moving here, this area is going to be, let's say, if we were to put this in startup terms, maybe 5 years ago was pre-seed. 2 years ago was seed. Now they're at Series A.
Right.
If you get here and even just build a network and maybe own a little real estate, build some connections, some social capital.
Yep.
All that stock is going to go up 500%.
Absolutely.
Over the next 5 years.
Yeah, because to me, it's all about relationships. And if there was ever a place where I would say that you could really develop like mature, meaningful relationships, it would be Northwest Arkansas. And I've said that over and over again. And a lot of people don't believe me until they come here. And then they're like, oh, I had no idea. I thought people would just be trying to steal my ideas or maybe just kind of give me surface level attention, but not really connect. Everybody that I've been introduced to has connected with me. And it's
not just a Zoom. It's let's grab breakfast.
Breakfast, coffee. Yeah. I mean, even when I reached out to you, you were like, at first I was like, man, this brother just got an award and he's getting some more funding and he's doing big things. Sometimes people are like, I don't really have time for all that. And I reached out to you and you were like, sure, let's do it. And honestly, I would say 99.9% of the time, that is the response that I get from people when I reach out to them and say, hey, I'd love to share my platform with you and tell your story. That's it. I don't want anything. I don't, you know what I'm saying? I'm not looking for vested funds or anything like stock or whatever. I'm just saying, hey, I just want to share the platform because I know that in me sharing these stories with individuals out here, both here in Northwest Arkansas, as well as those that are on the fence about moving here, I can create a great case for why this is a growing part of the country. We're in the Heartland, like you said, the Heartland Summit, but I was a part of the Heartland Forward Builders and Backers program. And there is just so much happening here. And I don't want it to be the best kept secret, right? I mean, I want more people to know about it because this area is going to grow. We're going to see up to about 1 million people in the population here by 2040, 2045 at the latest. And that train is moving, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
You just have to get on it. You have to get on it.
100%.
So I'm glad you're here. And I certainly want to connect anyone that's listening to this to the work that you're doing and specifically to Sober Sidekick. But what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Yeah. So there's a contact form on the website.
Give the website address?
Yeah, sobersidekick.com.
Sure.
So that will go to my email directly. Also, download the app.
Right.
And I'm involved in the community.
And it's on Android and Apple?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, you'll find it there, ranked 4.8 out of 5.
And if you try it out and you use it, give them a review and let them know. We're always asking for reviews on this podcast, but when you try out an app that kind of changes your life or really impacts you, or you find yourself sharing that app with other people, take a few minutes out to give a review for that app, because it helps the developer. It helps the person that created it. And it's just social proof that this is legitimate. This is worth your time.
And more than that, more than it helping the developer, it helps the next person who's isolated and it's 3 a.m. And they're maybe 6 months sober and they're like, maybe I can't do it. And then they scroll through the App Store and they see your review about how you connected with people and how you got out of isolation. Like, there's a few reviews I've seen like this, but I've seen reviews, and these are the ones that get to me, where people say, I was in tears within my first 5 minutes on the platform. And these are strangers that I've never met and never will meet.
Yeah.
And, that kind of human emotional experience, we just got to bring people together. So much of life is my projection of you engaging with your projection, or my projection of me engaging with your projection of you.
Right.
And we're just trying to bring those projections down and connect human to human, connect, as we are.
Yeah.
Come as you are. That's the biggest thing.
Exactly. I mean, you said it perfectly, and that's kind of what it's all about. That's actually why I love the platform of podcasting, because it just allows us to kind of get kneecap to kneecap and have a conversation and have real talk, right? Not a lot of fluff, not a lot of hyperbole, but just reality, right? Because your reality, and I know that somebody is going to listen to this and be like, man, Chris is me. I'm going through the same thing. And man, now that I know that this guy could overcome it, I can overcome it, right?
Yeah, if I can overcome it, anyone
can. So man, this has been great. I really appreciate you, Chris, taking time out of your schedule, your programming schedule, the running of this app schedule. It's the Sober Sidekick. You guys need to check it out. You can also check out the website at sobersidekick.com. Leave Chris a message. Just drop him a note and say you heard about it first here at the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. And we'll be sure to put all of his contact information and even a picture of him, so you see, the genius behind this great app. You can see it all for yourself. We'll put all of that on the show notes at iamnorthwestarkansas.com. But Chris Thompson, thank you so much for coming out and joining us for this episode of the podcast. I believe that your words of encouragement, your testimony, if you will be freeing for somebody listening to this, and will cause them to say, you know what, I need to get that app. I've been sober, but I need some help. And I think this app can help me bridge the gap of connectivity.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
We're all here to just pay it forward.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. Chris Thompson, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Randy.
Absolutely. Well, folks, there you have it. Another episode of the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. To learn more about this podcast, you can visit our website at iamnorthwestarkansas.com. Remember, you can find our podcast wherever great podcasts can be found. And if you do listen to us on Apple Podcasts, we would love a review. If you don't want to give us 5 stars, give us 4 or 4.5. And if you don't like the podcast, just tell us why you don't like it and we'll work on it. I mean, this is not, we are not in a vacuum here. We're looking for feedback, and we consistently want to get better at everything that we do. So definitely check us out on every major podcasting platform. And remember, our newsletter comes out fairly frequently, but please, you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website at iamnorthwestarkansas.com. I'm the host, Randy Wilburn. And remember, our podcast comes out every Monday, rain or shine. We will see you next week. Peace.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. Check us out each and every week, available anywhere that great podcasts can be found. For show notes or more information on becoming a guest, visit iamnorthwestarkansas.com. We'll see you next week on I Am Northwest Arkansas.